getting the Zoom link anymore. Sorry, guys, something has happened to my Zoom window. Give me a second. I'm going to log out and log back in. There it is. Sorry, I can't see any of you. Oh, now I can. All right. And here is my share screen button. Okay, let's hope this works now. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Okay, all good. Everyone can see the screen, the slideshow?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, let's get started. It's a Sunday morning, so I'll try to finish this up in time. Keep your questions for the end or keep popping them in the chat box, and maybe Vamika can read them out to me at the end, and I'll answer all your questions at the end. So to get started, I'll give a quick introduction to myself. I am currently the editorial director of Applied Science and Engineering, running the Asia Pacific Books program in that discipline for Springer Nature. Before this, I used to manage the South Asia Books and Journals program until 2019. And I have been working with Springer for almost 8 years now. When I was working with the journals program, my team was managing a portfolio of over 30 journals in different disciplines of engineering and applied sciences. And some of the key journals that we were handling, which you might have heard of, were Transactions of the Indian Institute of Metals, the Journal of Indian Geotechnical Society, and many others across engineering. Besides my core role at Springer Nature, I also am one of the steering committee members for the Springer Nature Committee on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I work very closely with the sustainable development communities in APAC and also worldwide. And overall, I've been in this industry for 15 years. Before I joined Springer in India, I used to work in the US publishing engineering textbooks. And I went to St. Stephen's College for my undergrad and master's. And besides the sustainable development goals, other topics that are of interest to me include women in engineering or just the gender diversity in general in STEM fields. Engineering education. I'm also very closely involved with the Falling Walls conference. If you want to know more about it, please do find the Falling Walls conference and Falling Walls organization on LinkedIn, and they have a lot of social media presence as well. If you want to get associated with them as the Research Scholars Forum, please, one of you get in touch with me and I can connect you to partnerships with the Falling Walls Foundation in Germany. Okay. Now, very quick introduction to Springer Nature. You all probably know that Springer and Nature merged. Springer and Macmillan Education, rather, that was the mother company, merged about 6 years ago to form Springer Nature. You see some of our main publishing brands here on the screen. We are really old in the publishing business, over 175 years old, one of the largest organizations in academic publishing. We have one of the largest portfolios with 3,000 plus journals and 12,000 plus books published annually. And we are also the largest open access publisher with over 600 fully open access journals and many others which offer open access publishing option. I will talk a little bit more about that during the workshop. And we are very proud of the fact that most of the Nobel laureates have published with us. You see some of the most famous names here. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second, mostly because I want to talk about open access journals and the options for publishing open access journals. So here you see a snapshot of the Springer portfolio. So the red part that you see in the pie chart is fully open access journals. Like I said, we have about 600 fully open access journals. These journals only publish open access articles. Then there is the whole gamut of traditional journals, which are subscription based, where there is no open access fee to publish. You can publish for free. and then institutions or individuals who want to read them by access or by subscription. These are the journals that your library has also subscribed to. And in these journals also, I would like to highlight this part, the hybrid part. Hybrid journals are traditionally subscription-based journals, but they offer you an option to publish just your article open access. So if open access publishing is of interest, please find out. And this, I'm showing you the Springer Nature portfolio here, but this is common across publishers, okay? So most publishers will offer the hybrid option in many of their journals to publish just your article open access. So if open access is of interest, please do get in touch with the editor-in-chief to ask, or if it is not clear, usually this is described on the journal's homepage or the instructions for the authors. Okay, let's move on. And this is just all the disciplines that we publish in at Springer Nature. And as I said, we are one of the largest publishers. So this is data from Web of Science, JCR. So we have the largest number of, the largest share of journal titles indexed by Web of Science in JCR. And by number of articles and number of citations, we are number 2. And as I said, once again, I would like to draw your attention here. This is the number of OA articles published by various publishers in 2018. And I want to draw your attention to these red parts here. These indicate hybrid articles, open access articles and hybrid journals, which I just talked about. So you see a lot of the articles that are published open access are actually published in traditionally subscription-based journals because they give the option to the authors to publish open access. You see this is visible across publishers. So if you want to publish open access, but you like a journal that is not open access, don't be disheartened. You might have the option to publish open access. Always find out. We will talk more in detail about open access in the presentation. A business, as I said, we are one of the largest. These are English language books. So I told you we publish about 13,000 books every year. The rest of the portfolio is primarily in and our portfolio is primarily made up of medicine, science, and tech, but we also have a very strong share in the social sciences and humanities. Okay, and one good thing about Springer Link is that we have digitized all of the archival books as well. So we have a lot of old books available in digital form through the Springer archives as well. And many of you would have access to them through your libraries. Okay, now here I want to stop, even though we're talking about Springer Nature products here, but this in general describes the kind of literature that is available to you as researchers out there. So I want to talk to you about each of these types of literature. Okay, so let's look at this as a clock. And at 12 o'clock, you see the picture of nature. Here we are talking about the most primary content. That's also what I'm going to talk to you about writing today. This is original research articles, which present new research for the community to read and grow their research on, okay? And this is mostly what you will be writing as research scholars, okay? And then we come to reviews. Reviews are basically a secondary source of research. It is not 100% original research, but rather a summary of what research has been done so far in a field, okay? So you might have seen review articles are published in many journals. There are some journals which publish only high quality review articles. For example, the biophysical reviews that you see here is a review based journal. Reviews are very important for research scholars, especially when you are doing your literature study, because they give you an overview of parts of the field without having to go through many papers. They're also a good source for you to learn which papers you should read, because typically a review summarizes a field, so it cites hundreds of articles which might be relevant to the work you're doing. And in terms of writing reviews, I always recommend that reviews should be written by experts who have experience in the field. That's my personal view, who have significant experience and expertise in the field. As research scholars, I recommend that you should stick to writing original research articles, because reviews require an in-depth understanding of the field, which only comes with several years of experience. And most top journals will only publish reviews by people who have expertise, known expertise in the field. Oh, I'm sorry about that. How do I make that go away? Did I?
Ma'am, I will erase it.
Okay, okay, thank you so much. I hope I didn't do that. No, my mouse is not creating that. All right, thank you. Okay, and then we come to the second stage of tertiary literature, which is also useful for researchers. We call them briefs and pivots in sciences and social sciences. But in across publishers, you will find these. These are very small monographs, very small books. You might have seen them. Many publishers publish them, and they are sort of an expanded form of a review article, gives an overview of a particular field, usually. Or it talks about the research on a particular topic done by one group over a amount of time. So it's like a review article from a single group on the work that they have been doing over the years. So these are also very useful for researchers to use when you're doing your literature study and trying to figure out which direction to go in. Then we also have a thesis reward program where we publish select theses. These have to be nominated by your institute. Select institutes get invited, the management gets invited to review, suggest what thesis should be considered every year. You can find the list of institutes who are invited on the Springer thesis page. We have a dedicated page on springer.com for Springer thesis. Okay. Proceedings and lecture notes are, of course, another form of original articles. So we have many series. Many of you might have even published in them or read them. They are known as lecture notes in. So you have lecture notes in computer science, lecture notes in electrical engineering, lecture notes in mechanical engineering, and so on. These series are primarily publishing proceedings of conferences. Okay. So we have a very robust proceedings program that publishes, again, original articles. Proceedings articles are also original articles. And they can also be a very good resource for researchers to read and study and find content that is relevant to you. Now, everything that I have been talking about from here all the way to here are actually books, but we still have books here. In the traditional sense, you might know books as research monographs or textbooks or professional books. We publish all of those in different disciplines and at different levels. So we also publish a lot of textbooks at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. We also publish, as I said, research monographs. Monographs are a very important resource again for researchers to understand what's going on in a field. A monograph is a research-based book on a single topic. So sort of like an expanded version of the brief or the pivot. Okay. So it talks about a particular research topic. Often it also gives detail about the work that the authors group has been doing for many, many years. Okay. They write about their own work. So it is another secondary resource. Now, I keep saying primary and secondary. Always keep this in mind. A primary resource is new research, like what a journal article is or what a proceedings article is. And secondary resources are things that are built on primary research, sort of summarizing primary research or applying primary research to problems. Okay. Then we have these two things here, which are I like to call tertiary sources. Okay. Even textbooks are tertiary sources because tertiary sources present work that has been done, has been validated, used, revisited again and again, and is now a part of the core literature or the core structure of the field. And that's what handbooks publish. And our major reference works come in many varieties. They could also be handbooks, they could be encyclopedias, dictionaries on a topic, atlases on a topic if you're dealing with earth sciences or space sciences, etc. Okay. So all, as I keep stressing, all of the information I'm giving you here is valid for most publishers. So it doesn't matter if the field you're working in, maybe Elsevier has handbooks that you might want to refer to and Springer doesn't. It doesn't matter. Most publishers and even academics and professional societies offer such publications which can be of use to you. Then the ultimate tertiary resource is a database. A database is something where the research has been used, validated again and again, has found professional applications, and now the data points from the research are used to create new research or products, or even validate existing research. So this becomes part of the databases. We have three major databases at Springer Nature: uh, Nano, Springer Materials, and ADIS Insights, which is a pharmacological database. The simplest example of a database that I can give you are log tables. If you have used log tables, I think most of you are too young to have flipped through a log table book to find the log values. You probably use the internet or a calculator. But when we were in high school, we had to go through these books, which were like log tables with the values of logs for each, uh, you know, uh, for the log function for each unit. Okay, or even the sign and cost tables that you get. So these are the simplest examples of databases I can give you. Of course, these databases are much more complicated and they're used for specific targeted research problems. Okay, with that, I have given you a view of what publications are out there for you to use when you're doing your research. Now let's get into publishing, and almost everything I'm going to tell you here today is going to apply not only to writing a journal article, but also to writing conference papers, and to a large extent also to writing your thesis when you are submitting your thesis. So let's get started with why we publish. Okay, we publish for many reasons. One of the reasons is to exchange ideas globally. The other reason is to validate our research. Unless the research has been peer reviewed by the community, accepted, and then published as published in a recognized publication, it is not complete because it has not yet been validated. And another important reason you need to publish is to make sure that your work is recognized as yours. So if you do work on a piece of research and then you don't publish it, and then somebody else arrives at the same results independently, then they get and they publish it before you too, then they get the credit for creating that piece of research. So research publishing is important for validation of our results, for recognition for our work, and also to exchange ideas globally so that other researchers can grow their work based on what we have published. Okay. And because we are publishing to exchange ideas globally, language clarity is critical. So if you think you need help with language, which is okay, that's nothing to be ashamed about. It's not, English is not the first language for many of us. So if you need help, there are many services available who can help you write in better structured and in a better structure and language. And these services come across, across the board. There are many budgets that these can fit. So we have a service as well with Nature, but I don't say that use only the Nature service. There are many good services available around who will help you with structuring your paper with regards to language, syntax, etc. Use them. They, as I said, they come in many budget categories also, so you don't have to spend a lot of money. But if you need help, get help for language for your paper so that it can be easily understood by the reviewers, by the editors, and then later by your audience. Okay, now you might have heard of the term publish or perish. You might have heard of it in terms of how individual researchers need to publish for their career to grow, right? But I want to describe here how publish or perish is a term that's also sort of applicable to research fields on the whole. So let's look at this little cycle we see here. When you publish in journals, then when you apply for grants to funding bodies, the funding bodies look at the history of publication. So you yourself might not have a history of publication at this point of time because you're young research scholars. But for example, your supervisors, when they apply for funding, they give a list of the body of publications that they have worked on with their group in the past. And based on that, funding bodies decide if the funding should be given to this particular group for this particular project. And once the funds come in, the group or the institution, the lab, the organization can hire more researchers And that's how the field of research grows and flourishes. And then again, the cycle begins. You have more journal publications coming out of each project, and all new researchers are publishing, and so on. It goes on and grows the field of research you are working in. Okay, now let's look at something which I get asked a lot of questions on. There are some times when I do short workshops, I don't have time to cover this, and then I will get questions at the end about this. So let's talk about this a little bit. The publishing timeline. It's very important to allow yourself enough time to publish in a good quality journal. Okay, some publication in good quality journals can take anywhere between 3 to 12 months. That's the most standard times. Sometimes it can take longer, sometimes it can take a little while less. But if any journal is promising that you submit your paper today and it'll be published next week, be very wary, especially if you don't know the publisher or the journal. I will talk more about this later, because there are lots of journals out there which are just exploiting researchers for money. They are not really reviewing. They don't have a rigorous review process to validate your results, and these journals are not of a good quality. They are not recognized very well in academia. So please be careful that if any journal is saying that your article will be published next week or in 2 weeks or tomorrow, it's probably a red flag. Okay. So leave yourself enough time to get published in a good quality journal. Now, most of the time is spent on this stage. All of this time, most of it is spent on this stage, reviewing and then revising the manuscript. Revision and rejection are integral to the publishing process. Don't be disheartened by rejection and revision comments. Okay. And it's usually this part that takes a lot of time, and it should, because that's one of the primary reasons for publishing: validation and improvement of the work that you have done. And as I said, very few manuscripts are accepted without any form of revision. Even like top researchers in the field, if you ask them, you would hear that they have to revise their papers, most of their papers, at least once or twice. 2 or 3 rounds of reviews are very common, even 4 to 5 rounds in some cases. And again, I would like to stress rejection and revision are integral to the peer review process, and peer review is a positive process. Don't be disheartened. Don't take peer review comments seriously. Use the comments to improve the work you are doing and resubmit it to a journal. So to give you an example, we are able to track when we reject papers from our journal, we're able to track where they go. And we see that in many cases, the papers that were rejected from a particular journal end up getting published in a better quality or a higher impact factor journal sometimes. That's because the review comments and have given the authors enough information to revise their work and build it up. And then they get more confidence to submit it to an even better quality journal. So take peer review as a positive process. Use it to improve the work that you're doing. And please don't be disheartened by peer reviewers' comments. Now, Orchid ID. I hope you all have an Orchid ID. Please, if you don't, go and get one. In simplest terms, an Orchid ID is like an Aadhaar number or a social security number for a researcher. It's a unique identifier. It takes 5 minutes. It's free. Orchid.org is a not-for-profit website. You can distinguish yourself so that in the future, if you enter your Orchid ID, every time you're submitting a publication, all your citations are automatically properly transmitted into your name. Because sometimes you might have researchers with same or similar name in the same institute, in the same department working, and then citations can get cross-linked. So it's good to identify yourself, and Orchid is the easiest way to do it. Many journals have also made the Orchid ID mandatory. And I think in the future, more journals might make it mandatory. So it's good if you don't have an Orchid ID, please go and register yourself for it today. Okay, now there are 3 things that you need to effectively communicate your research. And remember, your goal is not only to be published, but also to be read in your field. Okay, only when people read your article and cite it, that's when your citations get accumulated. That's what impacts your H index, a personal H index, for example. So you want to be cited and read and cited in that order. Okay. So you need for that a logical manuscript structure, an efficient publication strategy, including how to select journals, and a successful submission to a journal. So let's look at all of these three elements today. I'm going to focus mostly on the manuscript structure for you, and we will touch upon publication strategy. I will also talk about open access here, and then we will quickly go over journal submission. But whatever I don't go over in detail even today, I am still going to send you the handouts of these slides, so you can use them. There's a lot of information in the slide deck which you can use while you're writing. Now, one caveat already, I will send this with the slide deck as well. When I send you the slide deck, please don't share it with anyone who's not part of this workshop, and please don't post it anywhere, not even on the institutional repository. Okay, and let's get started with experimental design. Now, this is very important. Quickly, can someone tell me, have you guys taken a research methodology course?
Yes.
You have taken a research methodology course, right? In IIT Madras, it is mandatory for all researchers. Okay. Yeah, but many institutes don't have them. But you might have seen this there as well. They must have taught you how to design a study. But I want to stress about it here as well. So experimental design is very important. Now, I know I'm saying experimental design here, but even if you are not doing an experiment in a lab, if you're doing a simulation study, you're doing a survey study, you're doing a theoretical study, there is still a study design that goes in there. That's what we are talking about here. Okay. So most important thing is ask yourself, what is your hypothesis or research question? What are you trying to do? What is the problem that you are trying to solve? Because research usually tries to solve a problem in the field or fill a gap in knowledge in the field. So what is this that you're trying to do? Okay, what is your research question? It's very important. Ideally, you should do it when you are beginning your research, and that's what you spend most of your time doing literature studies, trying to find your hypothesis or research question. But also, your hypothesis might be different for each paper that you write. So ask yourself this question also: what do I want to achieve with this paper? What am I trying to solve? And what gap am I trying to fill? Then list the aims of your study. We are trying to fill this gap, and this is what we are going to do for it. For example, if there is a large problem in the field, you may not be able to solve it completely in one paper or in one PhD thesis even. So what parts of it are you going to solve? How are you going to solve them? Then decide what methods are appropriate. Sometimes there might be 20 methods which are appropriate to use. Are you going to use all 20 of them? If not, are you going to use 2 or 3 or 5 or 6? Why are you picking these 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 out of those 20? All of that is important. Do you have all of the relevant resources at hand? For example, you might need to use a wind tunnel, a very large wind tunnel. You don't have access to it. Can you go to another institute? Can you go to IISc and use their wind tunnel? Can you go to IIT Kanpur and use theirs? I mean, is it something that you have access to? If not immediately, then in an extended way. If not, then what? What are you going to do? If you don't have all the relevant resources and you can't get access to them, what are you going to do? How are you going to change your study? Then have that backup plan ready. Okay. And most importantly, identify your controls. What can affect your study? Okay. Controls could mean something as simple as climatic condition, weather, temperature, humidity, all of those things, to where you're going to stop. So as I said, you might not be able to solve the whole problem in this particular paper or this particular study. Where are you going to stop? It's very important. You need to identify what we call in mathematical physics initial conditions and boundary conditions. Where are you starting from? What is the gap that you're trying to fill? Where are you going to stop the study? What is out of scope for this study? That's very important. Okay. Identify your controls, identify your resources, and most importantly, identify your research question. Okay. And of course, experimental design, whenever you need to design a statistical experiment, please talk to a statistical expert to help you design the statistical study. And also, if you are working in areas where ethics clearances are required, please take ethics clearances. Sometimes you might not even think of it, and there are things as simple as photos which require ethical clearances. You might be working on an image segmentation problem and you just clicked a picture of your lab mate and used it to do your experiment. And even though your lab mate told you that they are okay with it, you need to get a letter of consent to use their photos. Okay. And also sometimes, you might be doing an experiment in the field. For example, I think recently I saw a paper where there was some experimental work done in a rural area, and there were pictures of the locals in the experimental photos. And obviously, the student hadn't thought of getting consent signed from all the people who were in the pictures. So then we had to ask them to blur the pictures, the faces in the pictures. So all of these things are very important when you're publishing with top international journals. So please take care of these. Get a consent even for using images, or if you're using patient data, if those of you who are in bio related fields. Always get all of the ethical clearances. Also, since we are talking about ethical requirements here, there was a recent case which made me decide to add this information I'm going to convey to you in my workshops. Please be careful when you are describing people with disabilities. We just recently retracted a paper because people with disabilities were not properly described. So they were using words like deaf and dumb in the paper, which is not acceptable according to the APA guidelines. Look at the American Physical Association's guidelines for describing differently abled people. There are certain terms which are permitted, certain terms which are not permitted. Please be careful when you're describing a differently abled people. It is a very important ethics concern and a diversity and inclusion concern globally. So read the APA guidelines and use the terminology that is prescribed by the APA guidelines. Okay. And many of you might be thinking, why is she telling me that? I am an electrical engineer. This was an electrical engineering paper. They were trying to build something which helps differently abled people communicate better with regards to speech recognition and hand gesture control. And this was the case where the terminology used was not the acceptable terminology. So please make sure when you are referring to groups of people, ethnicities, all of those things comply with the ethics requirements. Okay. Now, so speaking of ethics, let's talk a little bit about details of ethics. So one of the things that you need to do whenever you are writing a paper is also give a declaration of ethics related topics in your cover letter. I will come to that when we talk about submission in a journal. And also follow all of these guidelines to avoid any potential ethical issues. You will find a lot of detailed guidelines about publication ethics on the COPE website. COPE is the Committee on Publication Ethics. You can search for COPE ethics on Google and you will find them. They have a lot of detailed guidelines for each of these cases that I'm going to discuss with you right now. And they also provide a lot of information for authors, even flowcharts in case you are in doubt about something, what to do, what action to take about some of the ethical issues we are going to talk about. So let's get started with what you should not do. Should not make multiple submissions, okay? So never submit the same paper to two journals at the same time. You have to submit to one journal, wait to get a rejection, and then submit to the second journal. If for some reason you decide that the first journal you submitted to is not the right journal for you, or it's taking too much time for the review, you can always withdraw your paper. It's usually built into the submission system that you can withdraw your paper by clicking a button. If you don't find such a button, please write to the editor-in-chief, wait for a confirmation of withdrawal before you submit your paper elsewhere. And this also applies to conference articles. So don't submit the same article in a conference and also in a journal. I'm currently also dealing with an ethical issue where the same article was sent to a conference we published and to some other journal somewhere, and both were published. So and now we have to work on retracting one, because duplicate publications are problematic in many ways. They lead to overemphasizing the importance of one particular work or one particular subject area. And they also distort the version of record, because one article should be in one place so that all the citations can be recorded properly. So do not make multiple submissions. There are cases where you might submit a paper to a conference, it is published, and later you want to submit the expanded version to a journal. That is allowed, provided that you follow the guidelines of the publisher of the proceedings and the publisher of the journal. Okay. Some journals might outright say that we want completely new submissions. It's up to them. It's part of their guidelines. But most journals allow you to submit expanded works, but please declare this in your cover letter that this is an expanded version of a conference article previously published here, and cite the original article. Also, if you're using extensive materials from the original proceedings article, please take permissions from the publisher or the copyright holder to reproduce that in your journal article. Okay, so make the declarations. Don't think it's not important, or intentionally hide the fact that you have previously published part of the paper. This can cause problems later. Okay, that brings us to plagiarism. Now, plagiarism is a term that's bandied about a lot. You might also have heard these. Okay, I see someone's raising a hand. Please put your questions in the chat box if possible, and I'll answer them at the end. Okay. So plagiarism is something that you might have heard of a lot of times. Sometimes people ask me questions like, what percentage of plagiarism is allowed? Okay. And can you guys see my face? Yeah, this is my face when I get asked such a question. So no percentage of plagiarism is allowed. Okay. And plagiarism is not a percentage. The percentages that you're talking about, that people talk about, are basically overlap percentages which certain software tools provide you. The overlap percentage is only showing where the overlap is occurring. It is not an indication of plagiarism. Okay. Sometimes we might have a case where the overlap is only 4%, but there is still evident plagiarism because the core result of somebody else's work has been copied and published or submitted. And sometimes you might have something as large as, I don't know, 40%, and it is not really plagiarism. For example, let me give you an example. For those, I think there might be some people here from BTCM. So you guys would know what I'm talking about, and even the rest of the civil engineers. If you use the term reinforced cement concrete, okay, in a paper 40 times, it's probably going to show up as 30% overlap, but it's just a phrase. It's not going to, it's not plagiarism. It's just a phrase which is common, it's repeated, and it's occurring again and again. So it's leading to a large overlap percentage, but every overlap report has to be manually checked to discern whether there is actually any element of plagiarism. Okay. Now, coming back to plagiarism and its two forms, as I said, there are two aspects to plagiarism. Plagiarism itself is an ethical concern because content has been taken from somebody else and reproduced as your own, or even sometimes you might take content that you have published previously and take it, but there unless proper citations are given, again that duplicate emphasis problem comes in. So ethically, both of these things are wrong. That's why plagiarism has an ethical, very strong ethical grounding. That we are taking something that either has already been published or it has already been published by someone else and reproducing it, where we should be publishing original research. Okay. The second aspect to plagiarism is legal. It is about honoring intellectual property rights. If you need to reuse something, sometimes there is a need to reuse something. For example, I'm doing a study where I need to compare your results to mine. So I need to use a figure that you have published in your paper, but there is a way to do that because that figure which you have published in your paper actually is the intellectual property of some entity. In most cases, it is the publisher or the society that is publishing the journal. So we have to respect the copyright laws. And in this case, I am within my rights to reuse the image with a citation, but I need permissions from the copyright holder. Okay, so permission guidelines are clearly given on all publishers' websites. If you must reuse something, mostly in case of figures, tables, etc., please take permissions. And it is very simple to take permissions. Don't be disheartened or daunted by taking permissions. You don't have to write many emails to an email address and follow up or stay on hold on a phone. It's usually an automated process with most large publishers and societies like Springer, Elsevier, Wiley, IEEE, AICHE, ASCE, ASME, whatever. So they use these automatic permission platforms where you just need to go in, answer a bunch of drop down questions, and the license is automatically generated in most cases. And for one or two figures or small portions of text, there is no charge usually to republish. But you must take permission and make sure that you cite the original publication in the way it has been described in the permission document. Okay. And now coming to text. Firstly, you should not be copy pasting text. Okay. There is no need to copy paste text. You should be writing it in your own words. And I'm sure some of you will give me the argument, but what about literature review? And I'm just going to say, what about it? Literature review means you need to read the literature and then write your understanding of the field in your own words. Please write in your own words. You will never face the problem of text overlaps. Okay. In some cases, if you really need to use text as it is from somewhere, then please make sure that you have the permissions for large chunks of text. Can you please mute yourself? Somebody is. I can mute people. Oh, that's nice. Okay. All right. Thanks. So please, in case of text, if you must use a large chunk of text in original publications, I recommend not to do that. Please write literature reviews in your own words. But if you must reuse it, put it in quotes, and wherever needed, take permissions also, and make the citation of where you are taking it from. Okay. All right. Then we come to improper author contribution. This is also very important. I am going to give you two examples, one very recent and one a little older. But first, I'm going to tell you what kinds of improper contribution can occur. Okay. There are three major kinds of improper author contributions. There are ghost authors, guest authors, and gift authors. Okay. Now, for ghost authors, it's basically people who have actually contributed intellectually to the paper, but their names have not been included. Okay. And guest authors are people who have not really intellectually contributed to the paper, but one or more of the authors have added their name or invited them to add their name because they have influence in the field, or there is some other sort of conflict of interest or some quid pro quo going on in the background. And then there are gift authors where an author who has not contributed to the field, to the paper has been added, but they don't even know about it in many cases. So it's in some cases it's like an thing to honor someone. Oh, this person is my mentor and guide, so I will add their name on the paper. And in some cases, it is a rather blatant attempt to include the name of somebody well known in the field to increase the value of the paper in the eyes of the audience. Okay. All of these three things are wrong. If you hear about some of them going on anywhere, please report them to the journal, report them to the publisher, or report to COPE. Okay, and let me give you an example. The most common case is that we face in terms of authorship disputes is that of the ghost author, where someone has been left out. Now, I'll give you one example of a paper where this was some years ago when I was running the Indian Journals program. There was a complaint. One complainant said that my colleague and I worked on this paper together, but the colleague submitted the paper without my name on it, just as his paper. So then we contacted the author of the paper that was published and asked him, why did you leave out your colleague? And this person said, oh, I kept asking him to write at least one section, like at least the method section or the results section. He didn't write anything. He didn't write a word. So how can he be an author? Now, let me clarify this. An author in a research publication is somebody who has made intellectual contribution. Even if they have not written a word of the paper, they still need to be acknowledged as an author if they have intellectually contributed. To give you an example, you might have seen some of the experimental physics papers that come out from CERN, or the papers on the gravitational waves and such. You'll see some of them have like tens of authors, some of them even have hundreds of authors, because all of those people have intellectually contributed to the data analysis. The data sets are huge in those cases, and they need many, many people to work on the data analytics. And all of those people are acknowledged as authors. But do you think all of them have written like one or two words or 10 words in the paper? No. So writing words in the paper is not the way to uh, decide if somebody should get an authorship in a research article. Okay, it is intellectual contribution, direct intellectual contribution. Also, please be aware that your PhD supervisor, your master's thesis supervisor, if you're working with a supervisor, they have equal rights to the work you're doing intellectually. Okay, so do not send submissions without the consent knowledge. Even if their name is on it, do not send the submission without their consent knowledge and agreement. Okay, I'll now give you an example of a case we are dealing with right now. This is the case of a monograph which was published based on a thesis. We didn't know it was based on a thesis. The author submitted it and they sent us the manuscript. It was published. And once the book was published, the supervisor of this person's PhD thesis contacted us and said, this work is entirely based on the thesis, which was done under my supervision. And this person has not, informed me, and I have not been acknowledged as an author on this particular work. So when we asked the author, this person again said, I wrote the thesis. It's every word of the thesis is mine. So my supervisor, how can he be a co-author? But remember, your supervisor has equal intellectual right to the work that you're doing. Okay. So if you must write something where the supervisor either is not interested in participating, okay, if they don't want to be a co-author, make sure you get a letter of consent from them that they allow you to publish this work or the thesis or a book based on your thesis later in life on your own. You should always get consent from your co-authors if you're going to publish something later based on a work that you have worked with them together. Okay. So very important and crucial to take care of improper author contributions. Now, I know some of you might ask me questions about order of authors. Order of authors is not something that the publishers decide on. It is rather a community trend. So in some communities, the order of authors describes the level of contribution. In some communities, it's the, sorry, it is the level of contribution, but in some communities, it's just alphabetical order. I think in mathematics or economics, for example, they're always in alphabetical order of their last name, no matter the contribution. So it's entirely up to the communities. And as publishers, we don't make any recommendation to the order of authors. This is something you need to discuss with your supervisor. Talk to other people in your community to decide how the authorship contribution or the authorship order should be structured. Then next thing we should not do is data fabrication and falsification. I hope this is clear to you all. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you have done at least the high school experiment on the simple pendulum. Okay, you have, right? And many of you would have, tried to make sure that the curve becomes perfect by deleting some outlier points. Okay, anyone who tells me they have not done it, I won't believe it. Okay, so don't do that in your research. It's not allowed. Don't fabricate data, don't falsify data, don't drop out the outlier points. Okay, that's data fabrication. Falsification can land you in a lot of trouble. Do not create images. You might all have heard of several cases in the biomedical sciences where there were images which were doctored, which are visible, and they're caught later and the papers have to be retracted. So please make sure you don't falsify data or images in any way. If you are doing something to an image, for example, you're working with a micrograph and you need to enhance the resolution, or you need to enhance the contrast to make it more visible, or you need to zoom in. If you're doing something with the data, you should be able to list it in your paper that I have done this to my data to make it more visible, to make it clearer to understand, explain what you have done to the data clearly. If you feel the need to hide it, it's probably something you shouldn't have done, okay, or shouldn't be doing. So please don't falsify or fabricate data. And also, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So if it occurs to me again, it probably will as I talk to you more. Yeah, always make sure that your data is correct, and if anything that you're doing to the data, explain what you have done. There is a old saying called which says that if you torture data long enough, it will admit to anything. So don't torture your data, please. Okay. Present the data as you receive it, and whatever you're doing to clean up or present the data in a readable form, please explain what you're doing in the paper. I've already talked about ethics related to human subjects, and similarly with animals. If you're doing bio-related studies on animals, please make sure you have the ethical clearances of the local authorities of your institute, the country you work in. And if the country of the funder is different, then you need to follow the ethical clearances and guidelines of the country of the funder as well. And once again, COPE is your best friend. Find them and bookmark the COPE page. It's a very useful resource for ethics related information. We also have a lot of ethics related information available on both stringer.com and nature.com. Please check it out. All publishers have this information available as well. Okay. Now, a quick survey about what do journal editors want. It's not a black box. Editors-in-chief are not looking for something out of this world. They are only looking for good quality science that will stand up to peer review. It is original work. It is interesting to the journal's readership. And it is an active research area because they are also looking for citations for their journals. And of course, clear and concise writing that's understandable to a global audience. That's some of the most important things that you need to keep in mind. I thought the slide was good to include so that you know exactly what editors are looking for. It's sort of a checklist for you when you are working on your paper. Now let's come to the structure of the manuscript. Whenever you're writing anything, whether it is your paper, it is your project report, an email, or a text message to your mom, always tell a story. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay. So most articles are written in what we call the expanded IMRAD model. It gets its name from the core sections: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So IMRAD and expanded because it also has a lot of other important elements as well. So let's start telling our story. Let's start looking at all the elements of our paper. The best way to write is to write the methods and results section while you're doing your research. You can revise them later, improve on them, but just to get all the information and make sure you're putting everything in, write them while you're doing your experiment or while you're doing your work. Okay. And introduction and discussion should be written after selecting your target journal, because some journals might have guidelines on writing the introduction and discussion section in a particular way. And be aware that if you want to later, your paper is rejected and you want to submit it to another journal, you might have to revise the intro and discussion based on what the journal is demanding in the instructions for authors. Okay. And please, most people don't do this, but let me tell you that it's very important to read the instructions for authors. It is available on the website. Please spend some time, read the instructions for authors, read the aims and scope documents of the journals. Okay. And journal websites are nowadays, they have a lot of information. For example, on Springer.com, we also provide average timelines for the past year. So you can see how long on an average does it take to get the first review, how long does it take to get the second review, how long from submission to acceptance. You can see average timelines on our journal web pages, and many other publishers are doing this as well. So please go and study the journal before you submit to the journal. And title and abstract should be written last. They're like advertisements for your paper, so you should write them at the end after you have finished writing the paper. Now, let's come to the title. The title is actually a very important set of keywords, okay? It is used for indexing. It is used for optimizing the search of your paper, so for search engine optimization. Also, it is extremely important to introduce your manuscript to the editor and the reviewers and to grab the attention of the reader who will ultimately be reading it. Should convey the main topics of the manuscript in the title. Be specific and concise. Don't use flowery language or questions and stuff like that. And avoid jargon, abbreviations, and acronym. Now, to give you an example of why you should avoid jargon, abbreviations, and acronym, I am going to post an acronym in the chat box. And while I'm talking over the next few slides, I would like you to tell me what this acronym means to you. I am sorry if there are people from from social sciences or business here. But you might should also know this. This is a very common abbreviation. Okay, so tell me, and whatever you can think of, what does this stand in your mind for? So I will check the chat box later now after I cover the next couple of slides and come back to this example. Okay. All right. So let's move ahead. So once again, what is important for the title is to grab the reader's attention. It should include what's important, keywords for indexing, like I said, and it should be concise, not too long. And it should avoid asking questions, describing methodology or abbreviations, which we will come back to in a bit. State what was investigated, what was measured, and the sample the measurements were taken from. All of this is important in the title. Let's look at an example here. So you see in the top box something which looks like an abstract, but it's actually a title. And it was actually submitted like this. And in the bottom box, you see this title written in a better way. It's exactly the same title. So you see how it has been shortened. And I can't make head or tail out of what's going on here. But sorry about that. If I look at the bottom box, it's very clear, even though I'm not an expert in earth sciences at all, but it's very clear to at least get what the paper is talking about. It's talking about landscape evolution of a particular type on a particular type of tectonic margin in a particular place in New Zealand. That's all that people need to know. Not all of the stuff that was going on here, which nobody understands. Okay. So make sure your titles are easy and concise and convey all of the main points regarding the manuscript. So now before we go to the abstract, let me just look quickly at the chat box. Okay, I see. Oh, great. Thank you very much. So you have proven my point. If all of you can see the chat box as well, some people have said it's SHM stands for simple harmonic motion. Some people have said it stands for structural health monitoring. And these are actually very closely related fields. Structural health monitoring is a field of structural engineering, which is essentially a branch of mechanics. And SHM or simple harmonic motion comes from the simple physics of mechanics. So you see, oh, and then there is another one. I have never heard this one, standard health medicine. So you see how different people working in different fields have different names ascribed to the same acronym. Okay, Udayani, thank you for that. I have never actually heard of that before, but it's really good for my future workshops. Okay, so we have 3 different versions of the same acronym. That's why we say don't use acronyms and abbreviations or jargon-like terms in your title, because what the abbreviation, acronym, or jargon term might mean in your field, it might mean something different in another field. So it's important to make sure it's as clear as possible so your paper can find the right audience. Okay. Okay, sheer horizontal mode. Now that is just too specific. I really doubt somebody would put SHM as sheer horizontal mode in a paper title. They'll probably call it sheer horizontal mode. But you never know. So that's why avoid abbreviations, acronyms, and jargon terms in your title. And now that we are on the abstract, also in your abstract, okay? So you want the search engine optimization to be perfect. You want the right people to find your paper, and they can only find your paper if you have very specific terms in the title and the abstract, okay? Because those are the things that are available freely and get searched on. The full text of the paper is usually hidden in case of traditional subscription-based journals. It's behind a paywall, but the abstract and titles are available outside there, and the most search engines work on abstract and titles. So make sure you do that. You exclude things that might hinder with the optimization of the search of your article. Okay, let me close the chat box here and let's move to the abstract. Now, abstract, as I said, is the advertisement for your paper. Most people will only read this. Even if they have full access to the paper through their institute, they first want to read the abstract to figure out if this is something that is of use to them. Okay, so it should be able to be standalone, and it should give a summary of your research and the basic conclusions reached. Ideally, you should structure it in the same way that you structure your paper, that is in the IMRAD model: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. One line of each makes a 150-word abstract. Okay, let me, yeah. So you see this graphic here, which talks exactly about that. The introduction, methods, results, and conclusion or discussion. One sentence of each usually makes a 150-word abstract. And as I said, avoid abbreviations and jargon. Also, unless you are following up on a previous study, exactly, avoid references in the abstract. It will be very rare that you are exactly following up on a previous study that you did or somebody else did. So if you're not doing that, then don't use references in the abstract. And be brief, be clear and concise, write short sentences. And for anything that you're writing, please try to avoid using very flowery language. You don't need that in scientific writing. Now, coming to more things related to the search engine optimization, which I've been talking about, keywords are very important for search engine optimization. You should always use very specific terms. I will show you an example just now. And remember, some journals do not allow keywords in the title. I think most of the Springer Nature journals do not allow the keywords to be repeated in the title. The title is already a set of keywords, as I said before. You need additional keywords to make the search engine optimization even better. Okay. So let's look at an example here. We see here a title of a paper in the top box, which talks about nonlinear optics in carbon nanotubes. Okay. The actual keywords provided by the authors were these: molecule, optics, lasers, and energy. Nobody is going to find this paper based on these. I think if I search for molecule, at least in Delhi and Mumbai, the top result is a restaurant. So it's important to put keywords that people will search for. Now ask yourself, those of you who work in related fields, ask yourselves, if you were looking for a paper on this topic, would you ever search by molecule, optics, lasers, and energy? Probably not, right? You would search for more specific terms of what you were looking for. So it's important to give keywords that are more specific, ideally scientific or technical terms that appear in the paper. Okay. And a keyword doesn't have to be a single word. It can be a phrase or set of words. Ideally should be a phrase to better make it more specific and improve search engine optimization. So these are very specific to the paper, much more likely the terms that people would be using to find this particular paper. Okay. All right, now let's move to the core sections. There are, as I said, 4 core sections, and these answer 4 key questions from your readers. Why did you do the study? How did you go about it? What did you find? And so what does the study do to advance the field? Okay, Introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Let's go over each of these. Now, the introduction is, why does your study need to be done? Remember when I was talking about experimental design or study design, I kept telling you, you need to ask yourself the question. Ask yourself the question, where is the problem? Where is the gap? This is why. It's very important to find where the gap is and talk about it in the introduction. So you start with a broader scope of the field, give a succinct summary of what's happening currently. Where is the problem? What is the problem? Okay. And how you're going to solve this problem in this paper. Where is the gap? How you're going to fill this gap in this paper. Also, how far are you going to fill this gap in this paper? You may not be solving the whole problem, you know, not be filling the whole gap. You may only be giving a direction of what gap should be, how this gap should be filled or how this problem should be solved. You might just be giving a way to solve the problem. So talk about what exactly are you doing in this paper. Remember this visual. Start broad, narrow down to the problem, and filter out your aims of this paper from that problem. That is your introduction. Let's look at it in more detail, how to write the beginning, the middle, and the end of the introduction. The beginning of the introduction is usually a literature review because you're giving a scope of the field. Now, many times I see papers, especially from this part of the world, from South Asia, where the literature review forms like half or more than half of the paper. Now, you have limited space in the paper you're writing. Journals usually have word limit or page limits, okay? Use most of that space to convey what you have done, not use most of that space to talk about what other people have done. Write a succinct literature survey, not a long one. You can write a long one for your thesis. You have as much space and time as you like to do that, right? So do that in your thesis. And I can see a lot of people thinking, I can almost hear a lot of people thinking, I don't have any time to write my thesis, right? But still you have more time and more space than you do than in a paper. So please use it wisely. In a paper, don't write a very detailed literature survey. Write a short survey. If you think that some of your readers might need a more detailed introduction to the field, cite review articles from top experts. I talked about review articles being very useful to research scholars. Find good review articles in the field and cite them, because one review article will give a lot of information to your readers about the field. Okay. And the middle of the introduction is about the rationale. It's about the problem. Why are you doing this? And how you address the problem. Do not state the results from your study here. State the aims of your work and state the methods you will use to carry out your aims. Don't describe the methods here. You will describe them in the methods section. You can state what methods you're going to be using, just a short sentence about the names of the methods. And make sure that your citations are balanced, current, and relevant. Balanced in the sense that they provide a very balanced overview of the whole field. Current in the sense that they provide a most current overview of the whole field. You don't have to wait, be like, oh, this particular important paper just came out like 2 hours before my submission, so I must cite this paper. No, that's not necessary. By current, it means that you should have the most current state of knowledge in the field described. Okay. And relevant, directly relevant to the work you are doing in the paper. Do not cite, papers. For example, you cite the paper of the editor-in-chief, which is loosely related to the discipline you're working in, just because you think the editor-in-chief is going to be very happy and they're going to, accept your paper. No, that's not how editors-in-chief or reviewers work. You have to make sure that the papers you're citing in your article are directly relevant to the work you are doing. Okay, let's get to the methods section. The method section is about how did you go about it. It's important for 2 reasons. One, it helps the researchers in your field reproduce your findings and build further on your research. And it helps the peer reviewers evaluate the design of your study and validate the results based on the methods that you have chosen. So what do you need to convey? who or what was used in the study, samples of participants, materials, where did you purchase them, when did you purchase them, might also be important, who manufactured them, how did you conduct the study, methodology, techniques, any design of statistical tests, simulation experiments, talk about it here. Any conditions and control, for example, is your study affected by climatic conditions, is it affected by any other conditions? For example, you might be doing a study which requires a particular voltage to be fed into the system. However, wherever you are doing this experiment, the voltage might be lower than what is expected. That might affect the experiment. What have you done to correct that? Did you add a stabilizer or a transformer to give a constant voltage? Stuff like that. And how you analyze your data. What quantification methods or software tools did you use? What version were those tools? For example, let's take a simple example. Let's say you're using MATLAB or ANSYS. All of them, all the different software versions of these tools have different capabilities sometimes, okay? Sometimes they have bug fixes and stuff like that. So mentioning the version also helps, because what results you are getting from a particular version, or the way your results are analyzed using a particular version might be different from the version that the reviewer has, or that somebody else has who's trying to do a similar experiment. Okay, so mention the versions. And if you design statistical tests, please talk about how you design them. And if you consulted a statistician for it, all of that should be mentioned in the methods section. Now, when you're writing the methods section, try to use clear subheadings. Now, a subheading doesn't mean you have to write 300, 400 words after a subheading. It could be just a line after a subheading, but breaking it down into subheadings makes it easier to read and also makes it easier for you to write. Okay, give me a moment while I take a sip of water. I see people are still joining. I don't know if people are joining or these are people who are getting logged out and then joining back in. Sorry. Okay, coming back to methods, describe the methods in the past tense. So we did the, I don't know. Let me take the example of an experiment that I'm going to talk about in later in the results and discussion section. This is about designing a membrane for water treatment. So methods in the past tense. We use 3D printing technologies to design a low-cost membrane for filtering runoff water from fields. Okay, we designed. So past tense. And new methods must be described in sufficient detail. If you're designing a completely new method, then you need to give enough detail for the researchers, for other researchers to reproduce the experiment. Reproducibility is one of the core things of science. If your work is not reproducible, it may not be validated. So make sure you provide enough detail. If the details are too long, you can include them as supplements or appendices. Most journals will allow supplements or appendices these days. Or you can even write a short methodology paper separately and submit it to a journal which publishes methodology papers, and then reference it here. Okay, but please describe the details sufficiently for researchers to reproduce your work. And any established methods don't need to be described again and again. If it's a common method used in your field, then you just name it, and most people should understand what you're talking about. And if you have, again, design any statistical test, specific tests, or you're using any standard test, please describe them with the parameters. Let's look at an example of a materials and methods section, which will make it clearer for you. So you see there are subheadings used here, but these subheadings don't have a lot of text after them, but it makes it so much easier to read. It's clearer to read after that. Each method is described, and all of the parameters related to the method are described. They have described where they obtain the materials from, okay, who manufactured them, and they have described the statistical tests. Now the colors are only to show you all of these as highlights. You don't have to use color in your text. Actually, you shouldn't use color in your text. It's very distracting to read. So make sure that you do things like that. Split it down into smaller bits, easier to read, easier for you to write. Now let's come to the results section. Here you have to tell people what you have found. Okay. Again, make a story, use subheadings similar to the method section here. I will show you the example of the results section from the same paper. So use subheadings and use past tense to describe results. So going back to my water treatment membrane, we designed a water treatment membrane using 3D printing techniques and found that its efficacy was in removing particulate contamination was 75%. Past tense, we found. Okay. But figures and tables are to be mentioned in the present tense. Figure 1 shows the decrease in efficacy with use over time. Figure 1 shows present tense. Very simple way to remember these tenses is the results were found. You did the experiment before, so it was in the past. That's why they were found then and we are reporting them now. So past tense. But the figures and tables are here and now present in the paper. So present tense. Okay. Very simple way to remember this. Present the facts. Do not discuss your results right now. Discussion comes later. Some journals might ask you to write a combined results discussion and conclusion section. In that case, just make sure that you split it up into subsections. You can do that. Okay. And do not duplicate data among figures, tables, and text. The description of the data should be where the data is presented. If you're presenting data as a table, describe it in the caption of the table. If you're presenting it as a figure, describe it in the caption of the figure. Do not describe it in all places, and do not do a table and a figure based on the same data when they're not giving any new information. Okay, so do not duplicate data and then list the same data in text. It's not required. And if there are any statistical results, please use the results, describe the results of the statistical analysis in the text, unless you are going to, do a plot around the statistical test as well. Describe them in the text. Now, there are three things that need to be reported in a logical presentation of the results section: the initial observation, the characterization, and the application. So let's look at the example that I have been talking about of the water treatment membrane. Sorry. What did we do? We fabricated a new membrane for water treatment. We evaluated the physical and chemical properties under different temperatures and pressure. We found the efficacy in removing the particulate contamination was 75%, and this data is shown in figures 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Here is another example of the results section. This is the same example as the method section I just showed you. Again, you see they're broken down into little paragraphs. There are little subheadings wherever required. Okay. And the figures are just referred. There is no description of the figures here. Okay. They're just referred in the text. Now let's look at figures. Figures and tables are very effective. You must have heard the old adage that one picture is worth 1,000 words. It really is in scientific writing. And because you have limited space, make sure you use figures and tables effectively to communicate your results. And I will look at all of these things in an example here. Okay. Sorry, give me a minute. All right. So figures and tables should ideally have captions which completely describe what is going on in the figure or the table. Okay. This is like a small paragraph. It is okay. This is how it should be. You need to mention all of the stuff that is going on in the figure or the table in the caption. Okay. And make sure that you clearly outline, especially in case of tables, sometimes they're very hard to read. This is a simple Microsoft Word table where you can do like graded lines. I find these the easiest to read. Even if you have like a table with all of the borders, it still is harder to read because the lines blur together. But this shading makes it very easy to read each row, especially where you have large sets of data. So try to use this. And also you see here, all of the abbreviations used in the table are described as a footnote to the table right there. So do this. It's important to describe the table or the figure where it is shown, because otherwise people have to go back and forth, either scroll back and forth or flip back and forth to read sometimes what's going on in a figure or a table. So it's the most effective way is to put everything in the caption. Another example here, you see again, the caption is big. It clearly describes what is happening in the figure. And another thing I wanted to highlight with this example is the multiple panels, multiple panels. So you see here, all of this data is basically the same noise data in 3 different directions. The authors could have plotted this on a single figure with different lines separating or different colors separating it, but it would have been so hard to read. So just by separating it out into 3 individual panels, they've made it so much easier to read and compare. Okay, and always label your axis, provide all of the scaling information, especially when you're doing things like micrographs, provide the scale information, and make sure your labels are readable, because sometimes the labels are there when you're generating figures out of an automated tool, AutoCAD or something like that. Sometimes the labels are there, but in some cases they become so small that they're not readable. So in that case, clean it up and write the labels again in another photo editing tool, so that the labels are clearly visible. It's very important for the labels to be visible. And these are small things, but they really go a long way in improving the readability of your paper, and making the reviewer and the reader feel that the authors have actually made an effort. Now we come to the discussion section. Sorry about that. So this is the most difficult section for most people to write, because it is about putting your work in context. And as I have been describing, papers I sometimes see from the South Asia region, sometimes these papers don't even have a proper discussion section. So there is usually an introduction, not clear why there is such a long introduction. Then there is some methods. We did this experiment, results, we found these results. And the conclusion is usually like 2 lines. We did this experiment, we found these results. That's not a discussion section. And that's not even clearly indicated. And that's not the way to write a good paper. So very important to have a problem and describe the problem in the introduction, and then answer how you have solved the problem fully, partially, or how you have failed to solve the problem, because that could also be a result of the work that you were doing in the discussion section. Okay, so make sure you have a problem and you solve it, and then you tell people how you solved it. Okay, very important. So let's look at the discussion section. If you remember, in the introduction section, we had an inverted pyramid. Now we have a standing pyramid, because now we'll take our results and put them into context of the field. Okay, so always begin with your research problem, describe the design of the study, summarize key findings. This is the beginning of the discussion section. Then interpret your findings. What are the similarities and differences compared to other products or other papers or other results out there? Do you have any unexpected or negative results? Please don't hide unexpected or negative results. What are the limitations of your study? For example, sorry, you might have set out to do something, but you couldn't complete it. So what are the limitations? And why is it important to the field? The main conclusion and future implications. So I am just going to speak out an example which I made up in my head, which is my water treatment membrane, which I was designing, and I will show you all of these steps. So listen carefully. So we begin with the research problem. The problem was that in the arid states of parts of Rajasthan and Gujarat, there is a water shortage most of the year. We are trying to design a way to reuse runoff water from the fields, which can be filtered and reused in household uses like cooking, cleaning, drinking, washing, etc. And currently, some experiments have been run using commercially available water treatment membranes. which are effective but are very expensive because they have to be imported, and also they are not designed to survive the arid climates of Rajasthan and Gujarat, uh, and deteriorate very quickly, and they're very difficult to replace because they have to be ordered and in advance, and they're expensive. What we are trying to do is create a water treatment membrane using locally available rubber based polymer from southern India, and use it and print the membranes using 3D printers, uh, locally installed at district level. These membranes can be quickly replaced by just printing the membrane at a district level and shipping it to the villages where they're required. And we hope to achieve cost effectiveness and also enough efficacy to replace the commercially available membranes with this specially designed membrane. The rubber based polymer is also highly resilient to dry climates of Rajasthan and Gujarat and should last longer. What did we find? We found that the membrane lasts 50% longer and costs 50% less to produce uh, at the local level than the commercially available membranes. It is more resilient to the arid climates of Rajasthan and Gujarat and can be easily used and easily replaced by printing at the district level. We found that the efficacy of the membrane is 75%. This is my first block, first part of the discussion. Next, the commercially available membranes usually have an efficacy of 95% or more. However, our newly designed membrane has an efficacy of 75%, which means that the water filtered through this membrane cannot be used for potable or drinking uses, but it can be used for all other household chores such as washing, cleaning, and watering of plants. We are trying to design a secondary membrane which will improve the efficacy of filtration. So potable water can also be created using this membrane. This was the second part of my discussion. There were differences in the commercially available membrane and the membrane I designed. There was an unexpected result. It did not have an efficacy of 95%, which I needed to create drinking water. I wanted to create drinking water, but I couldn't. So I described the limitation that it can still be used in other uses, but it cannot be used for creating drinking water. Okay. Main conclusion, uh, this membrane can still be used very cost effectively for reusing water, runoff water from fields in arid parts of Rajasthan and Gujarat, where water conservation is important. It cannot be used to create drinking water at this time, but it can be used to create drinking water with a secondary source of filtration. Um, and we are also working on improving the efficacy of the membrane and designing a secondary membrane to improve the efficacy to 95% or over, so water can also be used for cooking and drinking purposes. Okay, so that's how you summarize your findings in a results in a discussion section. Please don't hide unexpected or negative results. And also don't make claims which are not based on your results. For example, if I had said, oh, it is 75% efficacy and it can be used to create drinking water, I might have made some people sick, right, by the use of that membrane. So you have to make sure that your conclusions are based on your results. All right. So again, summary of the discussion section here, always answer the research question. Sometimes you might have multiple results to convey. Okay. Always provide the major or the main result first and then describe the other results. Give your conclusions based on the results. I just said that to you, right? If I said you can make drinking water at 75% efficacy, probably would not be good for a lot of local residents. So be careful how you make conclusions or draw conclusions based on your result. And try to break up the interpretation in paragraphs. Again, when I say a paragraph, it doesn't have to be very long. Even if you do one or two sentences and then give a line break, it makes it easier to read and easier for you to write. Compare any results from previous studies. I compared my results to the commercially available membrane and describe same or different possible reasons why. Always reiterate your conclusion at the end and mention applications, implications, and speculation if appropriate, and suggest future work. Like I said, we are working on improving the efficacy of the membrane. We are also working on a secondary membrane, which can be clubbed together with this to provide higher efficacy of filtration. And more summary points about the discussion section. Always describe limitations. As I said, if you don't, the reviewers will. And don't just repeat your results. I just told you that many times we get a conclusion which is just a repetition. We found these results. Why? What is the importance of these results? How does it solve the problem in the field? That's very important. And always past tense to describe the results. We found that the efficacy of the membrane in removing particulate contamination is 75%. Present tense for implications. This means that the water filtered through this membrane cannot be used for drinking uses. So we found, and this means, okay? Past tense, present tense. And always be humble in your discussion. You see a little traffic signal here. It's not for me to say whether my findings have proven or shown anything, because this work has not yet been validated by the peer reviewers and the community. Instead, use milder words like our findings suggest, imply, indicate, things like that. And here is a graphic. This is for you. It's the entire summary of the paper structure. Very good for you to print and keep. And this is very important to know that you have to logically link ideas throughout your manuscript. So I'm going to focus on the curving arrows here. Make sure that the objectives or the aims of your paper actually relate to the problem or the gap in the field. The results and figures relate back to what you set out to do, okay, to the aims of your paper. And the implications in the field, which you describe in the discussion section, actually relate back to the problem in the field. Okay, now that we have done our manuscript structure, let's quickly look at choosing a journal and communicating the study's relevance to the editor-in-chief. So when you're choosing a journal, it might not be the journal with the highest impact factor, okay? The impact factor is not as important as how it impacts your work and your impact in the field. It is the journal that will best reach your target audience to maximize your impact in the field. Sometimes this particular journal, which fits every criteria, may not even be a journal which has an impact factor. Many new journals don't yet have an impact factor. So impact factor is not the only consideration when you are selecting a journal. Please be careful of that. You need to find the journal which will maximize your impact, which will reach the most readers in your field. Okay. Also, make sure when you're selecting a journal, ask yourself this question. Is this only for a particular narrow set of people? Is it a specialized paper which will be read only by people working in my particular field? Or is it a broader application which other people might be interested in? For example, if I was doing just a study of the efficacies of commercially available membranes in my example, then that might only be useful to environmental engineers, for example, or environmental scientists who are trying to find solutions for water filtrations. But since I'm designing a brand new product using 3D printing and a new polymer based material, this paper might also be of interest to other fields like manufacturing or material science. So maybe I should choose a journal with a broader scope. Okay. So always be careful about which journal you're choosing. Ask yourself this question: who would be interested in reading my paper. And how much accessibility do you need is also a factor in selecting a journal. Do you need to publish open access, or is it okay to publish in a subscription-based journal? Sometimes you might have funder mandates, especially if you're working on projects which are funded by European funders. There might be funder mandates to publish open access. If you have a funder mandate, you need to find an open access journal in your field. If you can't find a fully open access journal in your field, then you need to find a journal which will allow you to publish at least your article open access, the hybrid journals that I described to you in the beginning. Okay, so let's look at open access publishing and some of the benefits for it. It's, as I said, important for fulfilling funder mandates at some point of times, because your funder might say you have to publish any work that you publish out of this project open access. It increases accessibility, of course, because open access publications are freely available. So they are more findable, easily readable by everyone. For the same reason, it improves the number of downloads, increases the number of downloads because it's free to download and read. And it allows you to retain the copyright to your work in most cases. Okay, in most cases, the article is published in a under a Creative Commons license. So it allows you to retain the copyright. But in some rare cases, the copyright might be retained by somebody else. For example, if the journal is sponsored by a society, by an academic society, then the copyright might be retained by the academic society. In some cases, the copyright even might be retained by your funder if they are funding the publication. Okay, but in most cases, the copyright is retained with the authors. And now the last 2 points talk about publishing quickly and fewer restrictions on word and figure limits. This is because most open access journals are online only, so there is no corresponding print version for which you have to wait for issue assignment and stuff like that. So it is published quickly. It's allocated to an issue from day one. And there are, again, for the same reason, because there are no print restrictions, there are fewer limits on word and figures, because most of those restrictions actually originate out of the printing costs required for the print version of a journal. Okay, sorry, we have gone back. Now, very important, while we talk about open access, I talked a little bit about journals which are not of a very good quality in the beginning. And these are some things we call predatory journals. They don't always have a good or robust peer review system. And many of these journals, unfortunately, operate in the open access mode. So please be careful when choosing an open access journal. Look for all of these elements. You should be publishing with the reputable publisher or society. The editorial board should have some international and familiar names of experts in your field. It should be indexed by common databases such as Scopus and Web of Science, because some of these predatory journals are indexed by random databases. They will say they have an impact factor, but it is not a real impact factor. So if you don't recognize a journal and it is claiming to have an impact factor, please go back and check in Web of Science if it actually does have an impact factor. The impact factor is assigned by Web of Science. Okay? And also authors who have published in the journal, if it is a good quality journal, you should recognize some top experts from your field having published in the journal. And all good quality open access journal only ask for the article processing fees after the paper has been accepted, never upfront. Only after your paper has been reviewed and accepted, you will get a notification that this journal is open access. Please pay the article processing charge to proceed further. And if you're still not sure, there is a checklist available on thinkchecksubmit.org. It's free. They have a checklist. They say only submit if you can answer yes to all of the questions on the checklist for open access journals. And the questions are very similar to the parameters I just showed you in the slide before. If you are looking for particular journals on particular topics and you're not sure which journal is right for you, use the journal suggester tools on the publisher platform. Springer, Elsevier, most IEEE, all more big publishers will have a suggester tool on their platform. You can paste your whole manuscript, or you can paste your title and abstract and find journals that publish in your area to narrow down your search. Okay, and this is just about our transfer desk service. If your paper is rejected from a Springer Nature journal, usually our transfer desk will help you find an alternative journal also. for your paper. Okay, now we have selected the right journal, we have the logically organized manuscript, and we are ready to submit. Now, I want to talk about only a couple of things here. Most of this is self-explanatory stuff which you can use about writing cover letters, submitting, understanding the review process. All of that is given here. So most important thing to remember, journal editors and reviewers have other full-time jobs, okay? And they are contributing to the community by working on the journals. So you are competing with a lot of other researchers for their limited time. Make sure you make your paper and your submission as visible and as easy for them to process as possible. So a cover letter is important in this. Write in the cover letter about your manuscript, article type. Is it a case study? Is it an original article? Is it a a short article, review article, whatever it is that you're submitting? Why is the study important? Give a brief background about the research problem and the aims of your paper. Study design, one or two key findings, conclusion, and why will this be interesting to the readership of that journal? Describe all of that in your cover letter. Okay, and you can provide information about who can review your paper. If you have a conflict with another group, you can also tell the editor-in-chief who should not review your paper, and also give a publication ethics declaration. How do you do that? In your cover letter, you will write that we certify that the work is original and unpublished. It's not being submitted to any other journals. It is all authors agree on the final version of the paper and the journal to be submitted to. If there are any conflicts of interest, please declare them. Declare your source of funding and exactly who has contributed what to the paper. Okay. Then we go to peer review. Once again, I've talked about peer review already. So let's look at this little cartoon here. You see the papers going in, and there are all these people waiting to hack at the paper. And that's how peer review is perceived often, but it is essentially a positive process. Please take it as a positive process. It helps to advance the field. It also helps you as individual researchers to advance your work. And this is again a little graphic talking about the publication process, very similar to the one that I showed you in the beginning. And now I have one quick suggestion about responding to revisions. The rest of it is pretty self-explanatory here. When you respond to revisions, please make sure that you're polite in any rebuttals. Rebuttals are allowed, but you should ideally give evidence about them, usually in the form of other published work, and always be polite in your rebuttals. For example, you might receive a comment saying you have not cited the papers X, Y, and Z from John Smith et al. They are highly relevant to the study. And you go back and write, oh, John Smith et al. Don't know what they're doing. We are not going to cite their papers. Now, remember, in most cases, the reviewer's name is hidden from you. Okay. Even if it's a double blind review or a single blind review, you don't know who the reviewer is. And when you send this comment back, remember the reviewer could have been John Smith himself. Okay. So you might end up offending John Smith for no reason. So be polite. Another way to write a rebuttal about adding references is, yes, John Smith et al. Have done good work in this area. However, their work is not directly relevant to here. We are to what we are doing here. What we are doing is very similar to what let's say Johnson et al. Have done in their papers A, B, and C. And we have cited those papers here, and even Johnson's papers do not cite Smith's paper. That's how you provide a rebuttal with evidence. And please make sure all your revisions are highlighted clearly. No, don't just send a paper back saying, oh, I have done all the revisions. Where have you done the revisions? Highlight them, use track changes in Microsoft Word if you're using Word. If you're using LaTeX or another tool, please highlight the changes where you have made the changes. It makes it easier for the editor and the reviewer to find them. And once your paper is published, please promote your work, use social media, and use content sharing. Very important. Whenever you publish with Springer Nature, no matter if the article is open access or not, you will receive a link, which is like this. You will receive this link also in an email, but you can also go to your paper on nature.com or Springer Link, and you will, if you click on the share button, you will find this link. You can directly share it on a variety of social media platforms from here, or you can copy it and post it on any social media or sharing platform. Whoever clicks on this link can read the full paper from day one, okay, for free. They don't need to buy access to read it, even if the paper is not open access. And they will get, they can download or print only if they have access or they buy access. I have access, so you can see the download button here. Those who don't have access can read the full paper by scrolling up and down, but they can't download or print it. But most people don't want to download or print your paper. They just want to read your paper and cite it. So use this service that we have. It's called content sharing. It makes your makes your paper more visible to your audiences, and it also provides a lot of other information. This is the app in which it opens. It's called ReadCube, and it provides a lot of additional information about the paper as well. Okay. So now we have logical structure, effective publication strategy, and a successful submission. And this is the end of the presentation for me. If you want additional information, there are author and reviewer tutorials available on springer.com and springernature.com. And that's it. And we can answer some questions now. Vamika, do you want to read the questions or should I read them?
Sure, ma'am. So actually, there are too many questions. So maybe we can pick a few of them.
Okay,
Or I'll take as much as it is possible.
All right, let me go through the questions and I'll pick the ones that I find most relevant. Okay, there is a very vague question from somebody about what is the average charge by a publisher and how much do we earn after publication. There is no royalty for authors after publication of journal articles. Books are different, and every publisher and every book type will have a different payment. And there is no charge by publishers unless you are publishing open access, as I explained. If you're publishing a paper, you don't have to pay if you're publishing in a regular journal. And okay. Okay, so there was a question about choosing the right journal. Shivpal, I hope your question has been answered because you asked it early on in the presentation. Then we talked about journal suggestion. The best way to find the right journal is talk to your supervisors and experts in your field and ask them to suggest a journal. They know every field has a different set of journals for different applications. So they know best, working in the field, what journals you should be submitting to. Okay. So the question from Shivpal was that he searched for a journal and submitted, and in 10 to 15 days, they said that he should choose another journal, probably because it was not the right fit for their journal. So Shivpal, use the terms, the stuff that I gave you today, use the journal suggestor tools on the publisher websites, and also talk to experts in your field to find the right journal for the work that you're doing. Okay, there was a question, can we submit the same paper to multiple journals so that one of them might accept the paper? I hope your question has been answered. No, please don't submit the paper to multiple journals. It's a very big ethical problem. Okay. Okay, there is a question for research related to national security defense. We make use of human subjects. Do we need ethical clearances for that? Yes, you do. Please talk to your supervisor, talk to your institute's dean of research's office about ethical clearances. Usually the project itself will have a requirement of ethical clearances to be taken. Okay. What could happen in the case of multiple submissions, some sort of blacklist? Okay, first of all, please do not, I have already told you what not to do in case of ethics. Don't come back and ask questions about what could happen. There is a standard set of ethical guidelines for publishers, for publishing research. Please follow them, okay? And there are many things which can happen if there is if multiple submissions are found. It's not ethical to make multiple submissions. Please do not make multiple submissions. Okay, there are if somebody is asking for suggestions for plagiarism checking software. I think at IIT Madras you must have access to Turnitin, or at least your supervisors will have access to Turnitin. That's the most commonly used tool that everyone uses. It's perfectly fine if you're looking at for an overlap checker. But once again, let me try to explain this to you again. You should not need to use a plagiarism software if you have not copy pasted stuff. Please don't copy paste stuff. And then if you're writing in your own words, there should be no overlaps from already published materials. Okay. Please write in your own words. But if you want to use an overlap check tool, the most common one is Turnitin. And I think your supervisors should have access to it also. Most IITs are using that. Okay, so there is a good question. During the plagiarism check, we see that the references are shown as overlapped. Will this be a problem? No, this is not a problem. The references actually are excluded. Like when we run professional checks, there is a way to exclude references in Turnitin or Authenticate. So we exclude them. So references are not considered plagiarism, because references, of course, everyone uses references in the same format. So there might be overlaps in the references. So we exclude the references and bibliography when we check uh, with the overlap tools. You can also do that if you have access to Turnitin. There is a place where you can go and check these check boxes which tell you to exclude references or exclude bibliography, and then it just removes that highlight at the bottom. Okay, now there is a question. As per reviewing rules, is it acceptable for a reviewer to suggest citation of his own paper? If it is not acceptable, then how should the author deal with it? Now, as I said, it's all ethical stuff. There are fine lines between things. Sometimes it might actually be relevant to your work. That's why the reviewer is suggesting it. But in general, ethical rules of reviewing suggest that you are not asking for your own uh, paper to be cited. If you think that the reviewer is asking for their own paper to be cited when it's not relevant at all, you can always go back to the editor in chief of the journal and ask them what to do in this case, or ask your supervisor. And if you think the papers are not relevant to the work you're doing, you can also write a rebuttal, a polite rebuttal, right, like the one that the example that I gave you showed just a little while ago. Okay, now the next question. Can we publish college experimental results on which we work in the lab, and if it is not found in other papers? I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but you need to talk to a professor and ask them if the experimental results are that you are working on are relevant to be published in some journal. There are some journals which publish only experimental results, so it might be relevant there, but you really need to talk to an expert in your field to guide you on whether it's something that's worth publishing. Okay. All right, there is another question about review. What if the reviewers seem not to have enough expertise or did not seem to read the paper fully? How do we challenge their decisions? So a decision which is once made, like if a paper has been rejected, it's best not to challenge it because it just leads you into another cycle. Maybe go to another journal. And if you think that the reviewer's comments are not directly relevant or that they don't have enough expertise in your field, you can ask the editor in chief if they would consider another round of reviews with experts which are more aligned to your field. What does references in the abstract mean? Like referring to another paper in the abstract itself? Yes, that's what it means. So if you are putting a citation of another paper in the abstract, it's not a good idea unless you are doing a full follow-up study on a previous paper. There is no need to put references or citations in the abstract. Okay. This is very hard for me to say. How to prevent writer's block while writing journal articles or procrastination. Procrastination is something a lot of people suffer from. Please don't procrastinate, and you have to really take a decision. This is more of a psychological concern rather than a writing concern. But there is a lot of information and psychological support also available for researchers. Try to look at that. Okay, I really can't help you with procrastination and writer's block. I mean, I have that sometimes too. So it's something that you have to psychologically overcome. Procrastination is a psychological barrier. So there are many tools meant to help you on how to avoid procrastination. So check it up on the internet. Okay, there are a couple of questions. How long are papers usually in terms of pages or number of words and characters? Now, each journal has their own guidelines. Like I said, read the journal's instructions for authors. Every journal will have different guidelines. Sometimes they will have different guidelines for different types of paper. So a review article will have different guidelines than an original article. A case study will have different guidelines. Read the guidelines. That will tell you how long a paper in a particular journal should be. And then the second part of the same question is that if literature review part needs to be longer, you said to cite some review papers. What if no such reviews are available? If no review articles are available in your field, I first of all, I can't believe that because most fields have very detailed review articles. Try to find them. If no review articles are available in your field and you feel the need to write a longer literature review, I would say include it as a supplement to the paper rather than in the main body. Okay, there is a question whether Springer accepts literature reviews, results, etc. in tabular form, or does Springer have its own standard format? Okay. Once again, every journal has its own guidelines. Please read them. Springer publishes 3,000 plus journals. Elsevier publishes around the same, I guess. We can't have the same guidelines for one single set of guidelines for all journals. Every journal has a different set of guidelines. Please read the instructions for authors for each journal that you are interested in submitting to. Especially once you have decided between one or two or three journals, read the instructions for authors before you submit the article. Okay, so this is an interesting question. Can we use we to talk about the performance of the results, or should always be was conducted, etc.? So thank you, Udayani, again for this question. What you are talking about is active voice versus passive voice. Ideally, write in active voice as much as possible. Okay, it makes it easier for you to write. Journals allow active voice. Okay, it makes it easier for you to write, easier for the reader to read. So use active voice means we conducted the experiment. Okay, passive voice means the experiment was conducted. That makes the sentence longer, and also in some cases I think passive voice takes away the responsibility of the actual work that has been done. So I don't know if I don't recommend writing in passive voice. And if you read the instructions for authors of most journals, they will also say write in active voice. So write in first person active voice. Some journals may tell you if you are a author writing alone, don't use the first person singular. So even if I'm writing a paper alone, they would not like it if I say I conducted the experiment. We still have to use we, which is okay. All right, even if you are an author alone, but it's okay to write in active voice. It's better to write in active voice. You will find it easier also when you write in active voice. Okay, I don't get this question. How about statements like this method is novel and one of the first of its kind to be done ever? Are you sure it is novel and first of its kind to be done? It is okay to call a method novel. Let's say, oh, this is a novel method, we have designed it. But, don't oversell it. So it's firstly, you're not selling a car or or shampoo. Okay, you are just trying to publish research. So if the method is novel, say it's novel, but no need to oversell it by saying, oh, this is the first ever of its kind. It might not be. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, someone was telling me the story. This happened in the 90s, okay, before the papers were already the world became very global in terms of research. And at that time, a lot of publications used to also be in regional languages. So I mean, most of the research in France was in French, research in Germany was published in German, and so on. So there was this work, I don't remember where, it was one of the big universities of the East Coast. They submitted a work to an international journal, and which they had been like, which was culmination of, I think, about 5 to 10 years of work that they submitted a paper. And they got a response saying, it's very good that you have finally arrived at these results, but this was actually published by this group in France 10 years ago. So, all right. So it might not be, even though you think it's great and never been done before, it might have been done before. So it's important to be humble. Like I said, it's important to be humble in your paper and don't get too overboard with selling it. But if the method is novel, if you think it is novel, it has not been used in your field before, it is okay to say the method is novel. Okay. How are journals prepared? What tools? LaTeX and for citation stuff. Are you talking about writing articles? Most scientific journals will allow you to write in LaTeX or Microsoft Word in terms of your language. Sorry, not language, in terms of the software tool used. And you can use citation for citations. You can use many different tools that are available, reference management tools that are available out there. Any one of them will do. I think now, if you're working with Microsoft Word, even Microsoft Word has a pretty decent citation management tool built in, or you can use one of the other citation management tools. If you're asking about how journals are prepared at the publisher's end, that depends completely from publisher to publisher. Okay, some journals ask for suggestions on reviewers' names from the author. What is it for? Can we suggest our known reviewers? Ideally, you should not suggest people who are directly working with you every day. It should be people who are unbiased. They are mostly asking you to name people who can review your paper who are based in your field. And this is only in case where the editor-in-chief might need additional reviewers. Usually they will assign the reviewers themselves, but sometimes, it might be a very narrow topic and the editor-in-chief is looking for additional reviewers. So they ask you to suggest some names if you want to. And if you suggest names, please be ethical about suggesting names. Don't suggest the name of your best friend who is going to give a very good review for your paper. Suggest names of actual experts who are able to review the work that you have done. Okay. Okay, there is a long question. Let me read this. What if we did some research work, but experiments show that our method doesn't give more accuracy than those already out there, but the method is slightly new? Is that method worth publishing? I think you need to, again, this depends from on field to field. As a publisher, I have no expertise on to comment on this. You need to talk to your supervisors or other experts in your field to ask if what you have developed is worth publishing. There's another question: how to know which journal will reach the maximum people concerned to my field? It's usually, if you're looking at a journal, the people who are publishing in that journal are also the people who are usually reading it. Okay. So if you see the names of people who work in that field, who are publishing articles that are interesting to you, those people might also be interested in reading your article. So to know whether who is the audience of the journal, look at who is publishing in the journal. Typically those people will also read the journal, and then ask yourself this question: okay, these people work in this area, will they be interested in my work? If your answer is yes, that is probably the right journal for you. Okay, Who assigns impact factors? Is there some agency or something? Yes, like I said, it's Web of Science. It is a commercial service, which assigns impact factors to journals it indexes, and they have very stringent rules for reviewing and accepting journals that they index. So not all journals are indexed by Web of Science. The journals that are indexed by Web of Science in their Science Citation Index (SCI), you might have heard of that, or that those are the journals that receive an impact factor. Okay. So only journals indexed in Web of Science have impact factors. That is the real impact factor. Okay. What if the author could not answer all of the questions of the reviewers but answers most of them? Will the paper get rejected? Again, this is too general a question for me to answer. It depends on the field, it depends on the editor in chief and the reviewers and exactly what they were asking for. Okay. But try to, even if you don't know the answers to all of their questions, at least try to say that you don't know or it is not in the scope of your study. Don't leave the questions or comments unanswered. Okay. Can I use contents of my paper which has open access in my thesis? Will it come under plagiarism? Okay. Kalpana, thank you for this question. It's an important question. Even if your paper is not open access, you can still use the work in your thesis. Okay. It is usually allowed. Read the publisher's guideline on their website. They usually allow you to use the work in your thesis submission, provided you cite the paper you have published and quote the work that you have taken from the paper, but make sure that you are not assigning the rights for the thesis to anyone. I think in IIT Madras, you don't have to transfer copyright to the institute. In some of the other IITs, I know you have to transfer copyright. So make sure that the copyright, if you're doing a copyright transfer, then you receive permissions from the publisher of your paper. If you're not doing copyright transfer, you're allowed to use it in the thesis. But don't use the thesis to write a book without taking permissions later. Okay, there are guidelines at every publisher's website. There are guidelines on how to reuse the work in your thesis, how to manage preprints if you have posted preprints of your paper, how to manage self-archival after the paper has been published. All of those guidelines are given on the publisher's websites. So please read those and use the work in your thesis according to the guidelines, and always cite the papers that you have published in your thesis. Okay. All right. So there is another question. Even after writing a whole literature review by self, it shows 25% to 35% from papers and journals completely unrelated to my paper sometimes, and then becomes exhaustive for corrections. How to avoid such a scenario? Okay. Who has asked this question? Satyaki. Okay, Satyaki, in that case, you might be using phrases which are very common, which you don't have, you can't really do anything about. You have to explain that these are phrasal matches. I can't comment on it unless I see exactly what you are talking about here. But also talk to your supervisor and explain to them that these are phrasal matches and ask them on advice on how to get rid of these. If they're very short phrases that are showing up, there is a filter in Turnitin which lets you exclude matches less than X words. So I usually put matches less than 10 words should be excluded, because matches less than 10 words typically to me mean that they are phrasal matches. Okay, it's just common phrases which the software is picking up. Try doing that and then see how it improves the overlap percentage. And also discuss with your supervisor, because they are phrasal matches in most cases. People should, the editor in chief and whoever is doing the checks should also know that these are phrasal matches. So try doing the exclude matches less than 10 words. If that works, that means it was only phrasal matches. And declare this in your cover letter that I have actually run the overlap check and it shows as this, but these are only phrasal matches. You can write that. Okay. Next question. If someone has given citations to any findings to any author, And I also want to use the concept. So whom should I cite, the first paper or the second paper? Okay. So if you are using citations of, say you are reading paper B and paper B has cited paper A, and now you're confused what to cite, you should cite paper A and paper B, because paper A's author should, if you find that only relevance that you have is with paper A, cite only paper A. Okay. So you should, to maintain the version of record and getting the citations to the right version, always make sure you also cite the original author. So if you were reading a paper, you like that paper, but you also like, uh, 6 other references in that paper, and you read like bits of them or about them, you should refer to those papers as well if they are relevant to your work. Okay. All right. Is it necessary to mention limitations of our work in a paper? If you describe, you set out to do something and it didn't happen, it's good to mention limitations of the work. For like the example I gave, okay, what didn't happen, okay, because if you were trying to solve a problem and it didn't get solved the right way, it's good to mention limitations. That also helps other people build on your research. Remember, because you found a way in which the problem cannot be solved. Okay, that should also be visible to the rest of the community so that they don't waste their time uh, doing the work the same way again. And again, this is highly dependent on the exact problem and the exact field. So try to uh, talk to your supervisors and experts in your field to advise you better. Huh. Okay, there is a question. This is interesting. If there are journals or publishers that use non-English languages, how to make sure that our work are not already published? Okay, you mean somebody has not published the same work in that language? So are you picking up on the French example I gave? Well, there is no real way. Although most international work is now published in English, there are still journals in other languages, and many of them are translated as well. So it's usually you would know if something is going on in the field. Okay. Do we need permissions from the authors to cite their articles? No, you don't need permissions to cite. As long as you're not copying stuff from there, don't need permissions to cite. And even when you are taking stuff, you need permissions from the copyright holder, which is mostly the publisher, not the author. Okay. Okay. How to improve the quality of English as a good native speaker? It's hard work. Okay, lots of hard work. I can give you some tips, but it's hard work. You have to read, you have to watch TV, you have to practice speaking. All of that is required, and it's a lot of hard work. If you have the time, you're willing to give the time, you can do it. There is nothing that you can't do. I once knew a professional in our industry, not in my current company, but this person could not speak a word of English when he first started working in the industry as a salesperson. And this he literally taught himself everything, and he could speak perfect English, write perfect English, and he actually went on to become the country, the top boss of the country for one of the big companies. So if you want to do it, there is nothing stopping you, but it's a lot of hard work. The best way is to read, write, and speak, and also watch TV, watch how people speak. Okay. I always recommend American TV because it's easier to understand Americans. They speak with their mouths wide open and they speak slower. So if you watch that, you learn how to, structure your brain better with the syntaxes of the language. It is a lot of hard work. So you can do it if you put your mind to it. And reading is the best way to do it. Okay. All right. Fear of writing and language. Actually, language is what indicates, brings in the fear of writing for the most part. So start writing, simpler things. Don't write a full paper and just write a summary or an abstract. Go through it. If you have friends with better language capabilities, share it with them, ask them for inputs and help in improving. And more than anything, read. Reading helps you get the right structure of the language and see how other people are writing. Okay. You can, if you don't like reading books because they're too long, read good articles in newspapers. That helps with language. I recommend reading the editorials because the news articles are written very quickly, not properly edited many times. Read the editorials of Indian Express and the Hindu. They are very good, easy to read. Read small books, uh, and try to, yeah, that's the only way you improve language, by practicing. Okay, there is a question. Can we publish case studies in Q1 journals? It doesn't, I can't tell you which Q1 journal publishes case studies or not. Many journals do allow case studies. Many journals which are not in the Q1 of the impact factor ranking also allow case studies, or don't allow case studies. It's dependent on each of the journal and the subject discipline that you are working in. Okay, there is a question, how to publish a MATLAB code only? I think write a blog post if you want to publish a MATLAB code only. I don't think a journal will publish a MATLAB code alone unless you have a detailed paper around it. Okay, there is another question which was sent to me privately. If you are one of the co-authors of the paper, can you cite it in your next paper? Citing is not a problem. Okay, citing is never a problem. If you're citing a paper you previously published with other authors in your next paper, not a problem. You don't need permissions from other authors. And citing your own work sometimes is important, right? Because you're building on your previous work. So it is okay to cite your own work. Okay. Now I'm just looking for questions. If I would like to translate my published work in regional language with the same results, is it possible? You have to talk to like each journal has different requirements about translation. So some journals will allow you to publish a translation of a work, but other journals will not. So you have to give a notification to the editor-in-chief and ask them if it is allowed to publish translations. Okay, there is a question about altmetrics. Is it really useful or still in infancy? Altmetrics are useful. They are out there. People are using them, but they are still not, the primary source of evaluation of quality and citations, because they're still, I would say they're still, if not infant, they're in the toddler stage now. So, but altmetrics are important. So you should pay attention to them. And I think for the next generation, they're going to become more and more important as social media takes precedence over everything else. Okay. There is a question about, can my research problem has two parts, and can I publish these two parts in different conferences and journals? Depends. Please ask your supervisor. I'm not an expert in your field. So if you have two different parts of the problem or two different ways to solve the problem, maybe you can publish two papers. Ask your supervisor. They can advise you best on, sorry, whether you should be publishing two papers or one. And be careful, don't slice up your paper into too many pieces. This is very important. This is also an ethical concern. It's called salami publishing or salami slicing, where the same work is broken down into multiple papers and published, which is not fully ethical. Is it okay to remind the editor about the paper if review is taking more time than expected? Yes, of course. Please feel free to send an email to the editor-in-chief. Okay, there is a question. This is a good question. To extend my own conference paper to a journal paper, how much percentage of additional content is required? Thank you, Sudhakar, for this question. This is dependent on the journal. Okay, many journals will outright tell you they will not publish extended work from a conference paper. Many journals will publish extended work from a conference paper, and they describe what is considered sufficient by them to grow the paper. For example, I think I might be wrong, but you can check the IEEE website. But I think IEEE says that you can publish the conference paper in their proceedings as a journal article, provided you put in 30% extra uh, material or something like that. You need to check with each journal. It's dependent on the journal. Okay, there is a question about if we have a new method or invention, can we patent it after publishing or need to patent first then publish in the journal? Okay, patents are important. So I think ideally you should file the patent application first. That's what I recommend to all the corporate researchers I talk to also. Always file the patent application first and then submit the journal article so that you already have the patent application number in case of any future conflict. How much self-citation is acceptable? Again, depends on how much self-citation you need to have. If you're going to talk only about your work, then I don't know, it's fine. But ideally, you should also talk about what other people are doing and compare your work to them. So it's entirely up to the exact article you're writing. If nobody else has done any work in the particular problem that you're working on, then maybe all your citations would be self-citation. It's very hard for me to say as a publisher how much self-citation is acceptable. There is another repeat question about people in China publishing in their own language. So what if we don't know what they are publishing? Well, that's a risk that we have to take. And in many cases, those papers are actually also translated. So you should have that available, the research available. And in most cases now, especially in the tech fields, people are publishing in English. There is a lot of focus on publishing in English. If the review is taking too long, how long after submission can be considered too long to send a reminder email? Again, depends on the timelines of the journal. Okay, you need to see the average timelines of the journal, and if it's been a while and you haven't heard back anything, let's say if you look at the average timeline on the journal on the web page, and it says it takes typically 3 months to finish the first round of review, and it has been 3 months or more, and you haven't heard back, then maybe send a polite reminder to the editor-in-chief asking about the paper. Okay. All right. Now there is another methodology question. How to narrow the research question? Is there any particular methodology? Again, it's too field dependent. It's too subjective for me to answer this question. It depends on your particular field. You need to ask your supervisor on how to narrow down the research problem. I think that was all the questions. So we can wrap up now. We are 25 minutes over time. Thank you so much. And I will send the handout slides to Vamika, and RSF can share it with you all. And as I said, I'm going to send the disclaimer in. The recording and the slides are proprietary. Please don't post them on public forum. They're only for the attendees of this workshop. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good Sunday, all of you. And those of you who celebrate Holi, happy Holi. And those of you who celebrate Easter, happy Easter to you all. And thanks again for inviting me. Bye, everyone.
If anyone has doubts, you can ask regarding logistics, else you can leave the call. So you can register for other workshops on our website, and also please attend our talk, interactive talk today by Oscar Awardee Leon sir at 7:30 p.m. So it's an interactive talk. You can ask your questions like this also directly to him.
Ma'am, will the recording of the session be made available?
Yeah. We will process all these recordings and send it as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
If you are from Insti, we have sent the link to Smail.
Okay, okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there a form to fill? Means form to fill for this talk? Feedback form.
So you can register through our website, but now I'll post the link in our chat. You can attend using this link.
Okay, thank you.
So this is open to all colleges, so you can share with your friends also. This is like the highlight or the most special event of RST, so please invite your friends. No, because we will not have an idea, right, who have attended and who have not attended, because around 800 people have registered for the session. But only like 160 or 180 have attended the talk, so we cannot figure out who attended. We are sending the recordings only to those who attend live.
Yeah, and also who have filled the feedback form.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I get link for feedback form? Hello.
Yeah.
So the certificates will be coming through the email. Am I right, ma'am?
Yeah. So we
Excuse me, ma'am. Where can we find that feedback form?
Yeah.
Right now it has been shared in chat box.
Okay. If you guys have no questions, you can leave the session and join our next session at 2 o'clock. It's on digital twins and augmented reality, hands-on workshop. Bye all.